Welcome everyone. My name is Deborah Bell. I'm an integrative medicine physician with the Osher Center for Integrative Health, and I am the co-director of education at the Osher Center. And this is our second in our series about integrative digestive health. And today we have a great program for you about functional foods, spicing up our diet. And we're going to have Dr. Iman Maj begin. He's the director of the Osher Center and an experienced integrative medicine physician and acupuncturist, and will be talking with us about things from a Chinese medicine perspective. He'll be followed by Dr. Jason Harper, who spoke at our last presentation. He's a gastroenterologist here at UW and also done an integrative medicine fellowship and very interested in integrative digestive health, and particularly as it applies to nutrition. And then I will give a brief little follow-up for the culinary medicine component of this, and then we'll have time for questions. So with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Maj to begin, and I hope you enjoy the presentation today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Iman Maj from Osher Center. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Dr. Harper, for putting this series together. I'm really excited of talking about this topic that we have today. But before I start my presentation, I also wanted to thank Osher staff and Carolyn Kim and Rachel Comini for all the work that they have done in the background and putting this series, helping us putting the series together. So with that, we are going to start. The topic today is spices and their energetic properties. I will try to kind of explain a little bit about the energy of the food, energy of the spices, and then we will review some of the spices that we use on a daily basis and how we use them in culinary medicine, especially the art of cooking from Mediterranean area and also from Middle East, and how it's been kind of modified or changed when it comes to US. So there is some concepts that I try to explain first, and then we're going to review the spices together. I have incorporated some cases here that I hope that those cases, when we review together, they can help us have a better understanding about the spices. I have no conflict of interest, and the use of graphs and pictures in this presentation are only for educational purposes. So we are going to start with a case, and then we're going to review these cases later on. So we have Melody. She is 57-year-old. She's postmenopausal, and she has been dealing with some arthritic pain in her knees, in her joints. She has some joint stiffness, and she has some other health issues going on. In the past, she had some menopausal symptoms. She had some hot flashes and everything that they have subsided to some degree, so not a big concern right now. Melody read and heard from friends that ginger is actually really good for arthritic pain. So Melody went on Google and did her research and everything and picked up a supplement and started taking ginger capsules 3 times a day for her joint pain. Later on, she comes, and about 3-4 weeks later, she comes and starts talking about recurrence of the hot flashes on night sweats. So then that initiated a workup that's about your hormones, and we have to look at your thyroid, we have to look at your female hormones and everything looked normal, looked the way that it was before. And there was no great answer for Melody that why these menopausal symptoms are coming back. Our next case is David. David is a 45-year-old man. He's a bodybuilder, and he has high intake of protein. And he also wants to increase his metabolism because he wants to kind of trim for the summertime. He has done some research, and he came across this supplement that's a mixture of ginger, cinnamon, and black pepper. And he learned that this combination can increase his metabolism and help with toning and leaning. He's taking 2 capsules 3 times a day. After a while, he started having some rash and also experiencing some acid reflux and heartburn. And he's not quite sure that how this happened. So he was seen at clinic, blood work was done, other necessary labs were done, everything looked normal, and there was no real explanation that why. And he was eventually referred to us in our Osher Center to have a better look at what is happening with this individual. Now, we are, and as I mentioned, we are going to go back to these cases later. Uh, in traditional Chinese medicine, or as we call it here, TCM, anything that we eat in the form of food, herbs, supplements, anything that we eat has some effect on the body. And this effect could be temperature, energetic, or making some changes into the body. The good example here is we all know about carb crash, that we eat carbs and then half an hour later, everybody has a crash. We call it carb crash. We don't know what happens, but then physiologically and biochemistry, we explain it. Insulin goes up, insulin comes down, and it causes such and such a hormone imbalance, and people get sleepy. Or after eating turkey, people feel sleepy, and we talk about tryptophan, increasing the amount of tryptophan in the body. Or we drink ice cold water or ice cream and say, oh, I got brain freeze. So it's the temperature and it's some effect of the food on the body that we are all aware of. So the concept of food affecting the body is not a foreign concept. We deal with it on a daily basis and we actually believe in it, we accept it. It's the same thing in Chinese medicine. We say that everything that we eat in the form of food and herbs affect the body one way or another. Spices specifically affect the energy in the body, that we'll talk about it. If you're familiar with Chinese medicine, we call it qi, or the vital energy, the vital force, or the energy or the vitality of the body. The spices can affect the body temperature. They can make the body feel cool or can make the body feel warm. And also, spices can affect the organ function, meaning some of the spices can actually help with detoxifying liver. Some of the spices can increase metabolism in the body. Now, the use of these spices in Chinese medicine, or the use of food and spices, and for the purpose of this presentation, we only focus on some of the spices, can be based on one's constitution. So what is constitution? Before we get to the explanation of constitution, I'll give you an example. Let's say we have a family, and this family, they have 5 kids. And when you talk about the parents of this family, they say, our first one is very interesting. He or she always feel cold. Our second one, they're always hot. We have to keep the window open. We have to have aircon on. Our third one is very interesting. They are problem solver. And any kind of problem we have, we go to them and they find a problem. The fourth one, they are very introvert. And whatever we do, we have done coaching and training and everything, they're just introverts. So we go with exercises for them that's suitable for them as an introvert. And the last one has a different character. They don't like this food and this food and this food, which everybody else likes. So by defining these kids in this family, and they're from the same family, so there's a lot of sharing of gene pool. They are telling us something about the uniqueness, about the character of these individuals, that it is how it is, and there is no good or bad. There is nothing superior, inferior. They're just different individuals. This is their constitution. This is the constitution of these individuals. And this is what we explain in Chinese medicine. People have different constitutions. And in 5-element acupuncture, we have 5 different constitutions: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. And we categorize people based on their constitution in these classes, in these categories. Like, for example, if somebody has a fire constitution, we say they most likely they have a higher metabolism. Most of the times they look lean. The earth constitution, they could potentially be a little bit on the heavy set. They are very nurturing and caring. The metal constitution, they could be a bit more kind of like fixed on the details and focusing on solving the problems. The water constitution, these are the ones that are very fluid, flexible. They like sports. They could have some problem like back pain and knee pain. The wood constitution, these are mostly people who are really interested in learning new things. They are also nurturing. They like to help other people grow in a sense. So we are talking about this uniqueness of these individuals that they carry with them throughout their lifespan. Now, what is the definition of constitution in Chinese medicine? We call it's characteristics of their physical, physiological, and psychological state that's influenced by both inherited and acquired factors. So part of the constitution comes from our genes. We inherit it from our parents. And part of the constitution is built on how we live our lives, what I eat, what I do, the amount of exercise, and everything that I do on a daily basis contributes into my constitution. So the combination of my genetics and the lifestyle that I have defines my constitution. Is constitution changeable? Yes and no. There's some core components of constitution that you cannot change it. For example, I'm a short person. I cannot change it. I cannot become 6'2". But for example, regarding my digestion, what I eat, then that can actually help me with my digestion. That can change to some degree my digestion constitutionally. So based on these factors, it determines our susceptibility to certain diseases and conditions. And as I discussed it here, I mentioned before, these are the constitutions that we have at Chinese medicine. We are going to move away from them. That was kind of like giving you an understanding regarding what constitutions are. Now, the concept that it's important for us to reflect on, learn, if we haven't learned it yet, is the concept of yin and yang in Chinese medicine. It's a very difficult concept to explain, but let's put it this way. The yin and yang energies in the body roughly translate into the interaction of the nervous system and hormones in the body. And as we know that our nervous system has the sympathetic, the autonomic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that we have no control over it, has two components, sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they work together all the time. During the day, we have your sympathetic nervous system is more active. It controls my heart rate, my breathing, my blood pressure. And then we have our parasympathetic nervous system that could potentially be more active towards the end of the day. At nighttime, deals more with the sexual activity and also with digestive system. And there's this constant collaboration between these two. And then there's some hormones here kind of involved, like the cortisol and the serotonin, norepinephrine, and everything else, that collectively these two systems together, they define how my body is going to work, the temperature, the regulation of everything. So now bringing that concept into Chinese medicine, we call them yin and yang. And this is the symbol of the yin and yang. The white part is the yang energy. The dark part or the black part is the yin energy. And there are some definitions, there are some characteristics that are attributed to the yin and yang. Now, when talking about spices, we believe that energetically, spices can either be yin tonifying, that they help the yin energy in the body, so they're more on the cooling side, or they can be having more yang energy, so they're more on the warming side. Now, before I get to the details here, I want to mention something. Throughout lifespan, when we are born, our yang energy is, for the most part, is dominant, and we keep growing, and we grow tall. And then in middle age, there's a balance between yin and yang. The yin is responsible for a lot of our activities, including like our skin and hair and digestive system. As we get older, especially in women, postmenopausal, they start making these comments that after I went through menopause, I keep having these hot flushes. I have night sweats, or my skin has changed. My skin is a little bit dry. My hair has become dry, or my digestion was so great. Now I have a lot of reflux. So in Chinese medicine, this is telling us that the yin energy is subsiding, the cooling energy is subsiding, and the warming energy or the yang energy is still there. So there's an imbalance here. Now, sometimes in Western medicine, we go back, and for individuals who are like this, for postmenopausal women, we give them hormone replacement treatment. But is there another way that through diet, we could actually help these individuals with the intention of not replacing Western medicine, but adding something extra help? Can we provide some extra help? And the answer is yes, through spices, through diet, and through physical activity. So going back, yin spices cool the body and reduce the heat conditions, and the yang spices warm the body and boost circulation. These are the examples from yang spices that we have. They promote circulation, they dispel cold. What does it mean? Like if I'm feeling cold, I can use these yang spices and it warm my body. Or if I feel like I'm coming down with a cold, then I can, for example, we have all learned about ginger honey tea, ginger lemon tea, that if you're catching cold, drink it, it's gonna boost your immune system and it will help you. So this is what dispel cold means here. And they strengthen the digestion. They help with the digestion and absorption of the nutrients. The good examples here are ginger, cinnamon, clove, black pepper, and turmeric. Then we have the cooling spices or the yin spices. And these are just some examples. They're the most famous one. I'm sure there are many other ones that we can find, but these are some examples that I put here. They reduce heat, they reduce inflammation in the body, and they help with dryness in the body. The good example is mint, cilantro, and fennel seeds. So now, before we get to the spices, remember that these spices are something that in Middle East, Asia, Africa, and Europe, especially southern part of Europe, these spices collectively are being used on a daily basis. We cook with them. We use them in different dishes and we mix them and match them and we cook them. We don't use them in the form of a capsule to be put in a capsule, use like 3 capsules 2 times a day or such and such and such. No, the usage of them is in prolonged and long term as part of our lifestyle and most of the times cooking with them. The other thing is that they are not used in large amounts. They're not medication, and it's not like when we talk about diet and nutrition, for example, if I have the conversation regarding protein, that we say, okay, you need this number of grams of protein for each pound of your body weight. Or if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, we're going to limit your simple carbs or complex carbs to this number of grams per meal. But with spices, there is no such thing. There is no formula. We just use them and mix them. It's part of the art of the culinary, part of cooking. The last point I want to make here regarding the spices is that right now there's a lot of adulteration and there is a lot of contamination with the spices. So it's really, really important to make sure that you get your spices from the right place. I have no affiliation with PCC, but that's the place I usually get my spices. I also go for organic ones, and if you get a small jar from PCC, for example, turmeric, it's going to last you for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, depending on how much you're using of it. So making sure that we get it from a reputable and reliable source. Now, turmeric. Turmeric is a warm, pungent, bitter spice. We use it a lot in cooking Middle East and Asia. It supports digestion, it helps with digesting the food, and it's anti-inflammatory. So turmeric is very well known for its anti-inflammatory effects. The point about turmeric powder is that in order for turmeric to release its content, to release this active ingredient that's actually anti-inflammatory, it needs heat and it needs to be dissolved in oil. That's why we always have olive oil heated up and then we add turmeric. And then on top of that, we need black pepper. We need piperine. That black pepper brings another ingredient to activate the active ingredients of turmeric. So using turmeric the way it is, just in the form of powder, putting in water and drinking it, it's not the best form of taking it, and it will not necessarily release the active ingredients. Ginger. Ginger is warm, it's pungent. The benefits, it improves digestion. It relieves nausea. So ginger candy are very well known for controlling nausea, especially in pregnancy. They are very safe, and we tell people to have ginger candies. They help with cold. cold, as I mentioned, it could be temperature-wise. You take ginger tea, it warms you up. Or if somebody thinks that they're catching cold, they can have ginger, honey, lemon tea, and it will help with boosting the immune system, and it promotes circulation. Now, going back to the first case that we talked, Melody. Melody is 57, has arthritis, had some joint pain and stiffness. She's postmenopausal. So in the Chinese medicine concept, yin and yang. So the yang energy is still there, but because she's a female and she's postmenopausal, her yin energy has subsided. So she has less of the yin energy. Now, if I want to wear my Western medicine hat, we say you have arthritis, there's some specific medication here for you. You have menopausal symptoms, there's some specific medication there. And for your night sweats and everything else, maybe the hormones and everything else that we can include here. In Chinese medicine, we don't have diseases. We have pattern diagnosis. So based on Melody's symptoms, I tell her, I believe that you're having some extra heat in your system, which means that your yin energy is not sufficient. What happened? And when we're asking questions, well, Melody started taking ginger. And we just learned that ginger is heat producing in the system. So by taking ginger out of her diet or reducing the dose of ginger in her diet, Melody started feeling better and her symptoms subsided. So these capsules, the whatever 2 or 3 capsules that she was taking, three of the capsules a day, it's too much of a dose for her. For this unique individual, based on her constitution, another individual could use it and be perfectly fine for them. But for Melody, based on her constitution, that was a high dose and caused her having some hot flashes and night sweats. Going back to our warming spices, cinnamon. Cinnamon is another hot and sweet spice. It really helps with digestion and circulation. It's been used a lot for baking. These are the 2 main forms of cinnamon that you see in the market, Ceylon cinnamon and cassia or cassia cinnamon. Ceylon is the best form, and that's the one that actually has therapeutic effects. It balances the blood sugar, it's anti-inflammatory, it boosts the memory, and lowers risk of heart diseases and fights bacterial and fungal infections. So when you look at all these properties that it has, then you say, wow, it's a panacea. It really helps with all kind of diseases. The answer is yes, the answer is no. If you want to rely on the studies, there are really no big, large-scale studies to actually support these claims. But if you look at what people have done throughout years, maybe thousands of years of using cinnamon, then there is some data that supports some of the effects. Now, if somebody has high blood sugar, they need to use insulin. Yes, they need to use insulin. Cinnamon is not going to be a substitute for insulin for their blood sugar. Or somebody wants to use cinnamon as a prevention and hopefully helping to prevent against dementia. Yes, they can do that. But if somebody is in early stages of dementia or they have settled dementia, then expecting that cinnamon is going to reverse the course, that would be very unreasonable. The next one is clove. Clove is a warm and pungent spice. I remember from my childhood, we go to the dentist and they would put a paste in our mouth and had the taste of clove. So when you look at the effects of or the benefits of clove, one of them is it relieves pain, and it has been known and used historically in dentistry. It strengthens digestion. It warms the stomach. What does it mean to warm the stomach? That is a term we use in Chinese medicine, means that it helps with digesting the food. And it also relieves pain. What kind of pain? It could be general pain. It's not specific for like joint pain or headache. It could be just general pain and ache that people have. Clove would be good for it. Then we have the very famous black pepper. Black pepper is hot and pungent spice. It increases the metabolism in the body. It clears mucus. So somebody feels like phlegmy, especially we can see it in patients who take a lot of dairy. They consume a lot of dairy. They have a little bit of mucus, especially in Pacific Northwest. And black pepper could be good to add into their daily diet or regimen. It helps with the mucus and it promotes sweating. Now, going back to David. David, 45-year-old bodybuilder, wanted to trim and get slim or burn fat. So he started adding a combination of ginger, cinnamon, and black pepper capsules, 2 capsules 3 times a day. And then he started having rash and also experiencing reflux and heartburn. No good explanation in conventional medicine, but in integrative medicine, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, you say, well, you're taking too much of a heat-producing spices, and they will affect your digestive system. That's why you have having heat symptoms in the form of heartburn and in the form of rash on your body. So by reducing the dose of these capsules that he was taking, his rash, it took a couple months, but it eventually got better. Cardamom. Cardamom is another warm and aromatic spice. We use it a lot as an appetite stimulant. It improves appetite, it relieves nausea, and improves digestion. I have been seeing a lot of patients or individuals, let's call them individuals, not everybody's patient, and individuals having a desire to include cardamom into their diet, and that is wonderful. First of all, make sure that you're getting good quality cardamom. One of the issues with cardamom, see, it's a warm spice. So if somebody has a tendency for having a sluggish digestive system, cardamom can cause constipation. So it's always better to have a limited amount of cardamom and have it in the first part of the day and not towards the end of the day. And make sure there's a lot of fluid and also some fiber that's been taken as part of the diet if somebody's going to introduce cardamom on a daily basis into their dietary practices. Then we go to fennel. Fennel is very interesting because if you remember in the first category that we have, we put fennel as cooling and warming. So it depends on how we use fennel. If we cook it or we use it raw, it can be either cooling or it could be warming. So it's kind of in between, depending on how it's been prepared. It helps with digestion, it reduces bloating and eases menstrual cramp. Now, reduces bloating. If you have gone to Indian restaurants, you know, when you have your meal, before you leave, there's this jar usually sitting on the counter and at the counter when you're leaving, and it's fennel seeds in it. And as you take some, so you grab some and you chew on it, it has this sweet taste. And the reason behind is that they want these fennel seeds to help with digestion and reduce the amount of gasiness that one might have because of the meal. And where's okay, okay, I got it. There we go. Now we're going to go to our cooling spices and herbs here. The first one is mint. It's cooling and it's pungent. The benefits, it's clear heat and toxin. When do we usually see mint? During summertime, late spring, summertime, and we use it in tea. It cools people off. People use it for detoxification. They use it to help with liver metabolism. Soothes the liver. I put a question mark there. It's an exact term from Chinese medicine. What does it mean? Means that mint helps moving the energy at the liver. So it's good for mood, and it also helps with detoxification process in the liver. It can relieve headache, so it can make tea or it can have essential oil of the mint and rub it on the forehead or back of the ears, and it also helps with sore throat. Next one is cilantro. Cilantro is cooling. The benefits of cilantro, it detoxifies the body, it supports the digestion, and it's a very good anti-inflammatory. Cilantro, we don't eat it raw in Middle East, but I've seen here that it gets chopped and put in the salad. It's actually very good. It has fiber, and even in the form, when it's raw in that form, it still has the anti-inflammatory effects in the body. And just a slide here, the difference between cilantro and parsley. they have some difference in their characteristics and also in their nutritional value that they have. Each of them, they have their own value, and you can mix and match them. And some people have a little bit of problem with cilantro's taste. It can be a little bit too sharp for them. So if there are any recipes that has cilantro, you can substitute it with parsley. So the point with spices that we can use warming spices in cold weather to maintain the body warmth. You use cooling spices in hot weather or inflammation conditions, like somebody has fever, we can use cooling spices. But the balance is the key and the most important thing. As I mentioned, we use spices in very small amounts, mix and match, mix the spices according to individuals' need and their constitution. So the most important thing, knowing what one individual's constitution is, and then we can adjust and tailor the different spices they can use based on different seasons and different times. For example, if a female patient, they are having cramps, menstrual cramps, then special type of spices can be used during that time. And if an individual is more physically active or it's during summertime, other spices can be used. So it's kind of mix and match and play with the spices based on the time and season and individual. So how to use this spice in a daily life? This is a general recipe, so to speak. Add warming spices to soups, teas, and stir fry, and use cooling spices in fresh salads and smoothies and herbal teas. And pay attention to the body responses to the spices. You can keep track and see how the body responds and adjust the dose or adjust the form of the spices that we're using. Now, a couple cases very quickly, and let me check the time. Okay, I'll go over them very quickly here. Our first patient is a 45-year-old, and sorry, before I get to the cases, these are very rough cases. There's a lot more into each case, but I just wanted to give a little bit of flavor, so to speak, that how we deal or how we actually approach an individual from Chinese medicine perspective. So it's really, these are information extracted from real cases, and it's just some examples, but they are not put here to provide medical or culinary medicine prescriptive direction. We have a 45-year-old female or patient individual, comes with bloating, poor digestion, and fatigue. Okay, so in conventional medicine, they have bloating. I give them some medication there. They have poor digestion. I give them another medication for that problem, and they have fatigue. Is it thyroid related? Is it for anemia or something else? Or maybe they have indigestion, so I give them another medication there. But in Chinese medicine, integrative medicine, there is a pattern. These are not separate diseases. This individual has this condition that we call it spleen qi deficiency. Means that their digestive system is not working optimally, and they're not digesting and they're not absorbing enough nutrients. Okay, so besides other things that we do, maybe some Chinese herbs, maybe acupuncture, maybe lifestyle, maybe telling them what to eat and not to eat, what spices that they can use in their daily life. They can use ginger in moderate doses. It helps with their digestive system and reduces the bloating. They can introduce fennel seeds. It again helps with their digestion and it will release the gas. They can use cardamom. It stimulates their appetite and reduce the dampness. The dampness, the sluggishness in the digestive system. So they did it in conjunction of some other changes that they did in the lifestyle and diet. The outcome would be improved digestion and increased energy after incorporating warm spices into their diet. Our next case.
Dr. Maj, I'm going to interrupt for a moment and just,
Sure.
I'm not sure how many more cases you have, but I want to make sure Dr. Harper has enough time and we have some time for Q&A. So,
I have 2 more cases.
okay, great. And then maybe we can also open up the chat for questions now that we won't answer them, but just so that people have time to write them, we can do some quick answers at the end.
Sure. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. So case two is inflammation. Patient is 30-year-old experiencing acid reflux, heat intolerance, and irritability. Conventional medicine, every single of these presentation has its own name and medication. Chinese medicine approach, it's a condition. It's an umbrella diagnosis. We call it excess yang. There's too much heat in this individual's system. So we're going to try to cool the system down. So they can use mint, they can use cilantro, or they can use fennel seeds to help with the digestion and cool the system. And our last case here is cold and poor circulation. It's a 55-year-old individual. They have cold hands and feet, joint pain, and sluggish digestion. Cold hand and feet, we give it a name. Poor circulation in Western medicine, conventional medicine, maybe they have Raynaud's. They have joint pain. Is it arthritic? Is it inflammatory? And sluggish digestion, medication, medication, medication. No objection there, but in Chinese medicine approach is a pattern diagnosis. There's a yang deficiency. The heating energy is deficient. So things are not moving as they should in the body. Things are stagnant. So we want to warm the body. We can use cinnamon to boost the circulation in the body. We can use clove to improve the digestion, or we can use black pepper to promote sweating. And the outcome that is expected, better circulation, reduced joint pain, and improved digestion after warming spices are introduced. So the take-home points are spices are powerful tools for health. Understanding their energetic properties help balance the body and the body metabolism, and incorporating them mindfully into our daily diet can be very helpful. And I really encourage you guys to kind of experiment with the spices and enjoy playing with them. Just remember, just small amounts of spices. We don't use a lot of spices when we cook with them. And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Maj. It's really, really helpful, useful presentation. And I think we'll move right into Dr. Harper's presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a lovely segue into what I was hoping to talk to you guys about today, especially emphasizing this through line of when we're using food for potential medicinal value, it's really important that we individualize the recommendations to the person in question. These are not one size fits all approaches. So jumping right in, for those of you who are at the first session, you might recall we were talking about food in its multi-sensory domains, how we use our senses to eat. And I very purposefully glossed over one of our very important senses, which is the sense of taste. And so today I'd like to circle back to that and do a bit of a deeper dive into this primary sense. If you really think about it, taste is actually our primordial sense. If we go all the way back to the single-celled organisms, which hundreds of millions of years ago, from which we all derive, the way that they essentially see the world around them, in a manner of speaking, is taste. They are sensing chemicals in their water-soluble environment, and that is ultimately a rough description of the sense of taste. As I mentioned in the original talk, taste receptors, which were only recently worked out, the actual science behind taste, maybe over the past 10 to 15 years, are widespread throughout the body. They're obviously in high concentration on our tongues, but we have taste receptors all throughout, for instance, the GI tract, and their activation has very interesting effects. Thus far, we've identified 5 principal tastes that have specific receptors that are responsible for this sensation. And those are some of which have been recognized since antiquity. That would be the sweet, salty, sour, and bitter taste, and then more recently described as the so-called umami taste. There's some other candidate tastes that might be sensed either through our already existing taste receptors or taste receptors that have yet to be fully characterized. I'm going to go through most of these tastes fairly cursorily, and then we're going to end with, at least in our modern industrialized diets, a neglected taste that I want to focus on for the remainder, which is the bitter taste. Let's talk about sweet taste sensation. Sweet taste sensation is a primarily adaptive and very centrally stimulating taste response. And this makes intuitive sense. Historically, foods that are high in sweet tastes can be relied upon as a ready source of easily digested and absorbed calories of energy. And there's usually a preponderance of sweet taste usually means that that food in question is safe to eat. The sweet taste receptor is activated not just by sugars in the diet, but by also certain proteins and amino acids. It's for this reason that gram for gram, some artificial sweeteners like aspartame, which is just a sequence of a few amino acids, can provide a very intense sweet sensation with activation of these receptors. Just a couple of, I think, interesting factoids about the sweet taste receptors is that, first of all, their sensitivity to sweet taste varies over the course of the day for most individuals. In medicine, we would call this diurnal variation. So our sensitivity, our ability to detect sweet tones in a food is augmented toward the end of the day. There's also significant genetic differences in sweet sensitivity. This extends to some of the other tastes that we're going to talk about. And there's been some interesting work that has linked individuals that might happen to have alterations in the sweet receptor that makes it more sensitive for them, but this has been linked to certain cardiometabolic conditions like increased rates of type 2 diabetes and early insulin resistance. The salty taste is another generally perceived as pleasurable taste sensation. It has strong central reward mechanisms when we're exposed to salty tastes. Now, the salt taste receptor, interestingly enough, is one of the last to be worked out. And it's hypothesized that there's actually two versions of this receptor. And we've thus far only identified one of them, which is the so-called low salt receptor. And again, this is a positive stimulus. This is why we enjoy eating food that is, quote, properly seasoned. But we all know in our own cooking, or if we've eaten out and we've gone a little bit too far afield in salting our food, that there's a fine line between pleasurable and inedible. So there is a hypothesis that there's a secondary salt taste receptor that's more of a threshold effect, that once you go beyond a certain amount, food becomes unpalatable and very unpleasant to eat. Another, I think, just given of our modern industrialized diet is that in general, we are overexposed to a lot of salt taste sensations. And over time, this diminishes the sensitivity of our receptors. Anybody who they themselves might have happened to have been placed on a low sodium diet for medical purposes, I can certainly speak to this secondhand. For instance, my father had congestive heart failure and was placed on a low sodium diet. And there is a significant accommodation for some of these folks that has to take place up front because, frankly, food starts to all taste very bland. The salt taste receptor can be activated by other ions beyond sodium. Things like potassium can activate this as well. But it's a very different taste sensation if you're not used to it. I don't know if anybody listening has ever tried salt substitutes before, like potassium salt. Personally, for instance, I find it has a very sharp metallic tone to it that is not particularly pleasant. The good news is, with adaptation, if you reduce the saltiness of your food, you can restore the sensitivity of the receptors so that food can still taste pleasurably seasoned without necessarily having quite as much salt in it. The sour taste evolutionarily is a very interesting one. For most of the animal kingdom, activation of sour taste receptors is a predominantly aversive phenomenon. And again, this makes intuitive sense. This is designed as largely a protective mechanism because foods that have spoiled and gone over are going to have a predominance of sour tones to the food. There are a couple of animals, human beings being one of them, however, that have evolved to find, to some extent, the sour taste to be pleasurable. And in particular, complementary to the primary positive taste of sweet and salty. Anybody, again, if we're talking about culinary arts, anybody knows, right? Especially if you want to rescue a dish that you might have over-seasoned, a splash of acid does wonders to highlighting the full flavor profile of the meal. It's not clear why humans and other great apes have evolved to enjoy sour flavors to some extent. One interesting hypothesis is that most of the animal kingdom, with the exception of primates and guinea pigs, are capable of synthesizing vitamin C within the body. Vitamin C is not an essential nutrient for most animals. Humans are among the exceptions. So one thought is that we evolved to enjoy sour flavors to some extent because ascorbic acid, vitamin C, is of course itself sour and is often found in higher amounts in otherwise intrinsically sour foods. Another potential thought is that, again, these same animals, us included, have developed a taste in some cases for mildly fermented foods. Obviously, foods that have spoiled and gone over, this is not the case. Mildly fermented foods do have some increased nutrient absorption inherent to the slightly acidic environment that defines the state of mild fermentation. So again, another thought would be that the adaptive nature here is that this might have allowed us to extract more nutrients from foods that had mildly fermented and had those sour tastes. The umami taste was the last principal taste to be recognized. And it's a little hard to put into words what the pure sensation of this taste is. It's often described as an earthy taste, for instance. The umami taste is triggered by exposure to an amino acid in food products, L-glutamate. This is a naturally occurring amino acid, though you can get a purified version of this in the form of the food additive MSG, or monosodium glutamate. It's a bit of a digression, so I'm going to gloss over it for the context of this, but there's a really interesting history around MSG as a food additive. And certainly, just speaking personally, growing up in this country, was exposed to a lot of the idea that this food additive is somehow intrinsically negative or bad for us. And there's a very interesting and frankly slightly unfortunate history behind those connotations. It's not to suggest that there aren't individuals out there who may experience MSG hypersensitivity, but MSG is a staple food seasoning for many global cuisines. And this idea that it is intrinsically bad for us is largely a misnomer. The first report in the Western scientific literature of MSG sensitivity came from a letter to the editor that was sent to the New England Journal in the 1960s. And for a number of decades, this phenomenon was known by the really unfortunate moniker of Chinese restaurant syndrome, which I think gives a flavor for a lot of the bias that came into considering MSG as a food additive. It's not entirely clear what the umami taste receptors do in the body, but certainly from a culinary standpoint, the addition of umami tastes to a meal or a dish tend to increase the palatability and pleasurability of that same dish, while not having to rely so much, again, on the sweet and salty undertones to provide that similar positive sensation. In the GI tract, activation of umami taste receptors seems to, for instance, augment the release of digestive enzymes. So this is playing some role. Classic foods that are described as being rich in umami taste because of an increased amount of free glutamate in the food. Classic examples includes Parmesan cheese, particularly the rinds, cooked down tomatoes. So think of things like tomato paste or roasted tomatoes are rich in glutamate. And then certain culinary mushrooms are very high in glutamate and provide this pleasurable, generally pleasurable taste sensation. These two next slides aren't really about primary taste, but I think this is an interesting corollary to a lot of what Iman was talking about in terms of how some of the foods we eat have physical properties that we can sense. And in this case, what I'm talking about is the physical property of temperature sensation, untethered from actual thermal changes that occur after we eat these foods. The first is spiciness, the spicy characteristic of a food. Capsaicin, which is naturally occurring in the pepper family, binds to and activates receptors in our bodies that are involved in, among other things, temperature sensation. So it really is this idea that you're telling your body that the temperature is rising, even though there's no actual change in temperature. Capsaicin has some really interesting medicinal properties. Now, a lot of us, in particular, if we're not fans of spicy foods, can attest to the fact that if we don't eat spicy food very often, and we eat quite a lot of it, of course, it can have negative GI effects. It can cause a lot of indigestion, a lot of stomach upset. But studies have shown that in smaller dosed amounts, capsaicin activation of these receptors in the GI tract actually seems to serve a protective and positive effect, which, if you think about it a step further, makes sense. The tissues are sensing a potential thermal injury, which is going to activate repair and recovery mechanisms, but no such injury is actually occurring. So I really want to highlight a very common misperception that I see quite often in my clinic of people assuming that spicy foods, or maybe even told as much, are directly harmful to the lining of the gut. Spicy foods do not in and of themselves cause ulcerations, cause acid reflux. Your mileage may vary as to your tolerance of them, but there's actually been studies that have shown that capsaicin in a purified form can actually improve the speed of, for instance, healing of peptic ulcers in the stomach. Again, likely by endogenous mechanisms to promote mucus production and promote healing of the lining of the gut. The mirror image of this is receptors both within our GI tract and elsewhere in our body that perceive the opposite, that can perceive a cooling sensation when there's no actual reduction in temperature. And the classic example of a compound that causes this sensation is menthol, which is found naturally in, among other peppermints. We go back to this idea of cooling herbs. In the GI tract, activation of these receptors that sense this cooling sensation have the intrinsic action simultaneously of causing relaxation of the intestinal smooth muscle. So, for instance, medicinally, and there's a body of literature around this, we can use things like peppermint oil to relax intestinal spasm that some people might have if they experience a lot of cramping or bloating after meals. And then I listed a couple other examples of similar herbs here that have this cooling sensation. But where I want to end up with for the remainder of my slides is to focus on this often neglected taste in our culinary repertoire, which is the bitter taste. So along with the sweet taste receptors, the bitter taste receptor was one of the first taste receptors that was identified. And again, it's fairly ubiquitous in the body. Evolutionarily, our ability to sense and detect bitter taste likely serves a protective purpose because, among other things, toxic compounds often have a very intensely bitter taste. And so the fact is that bitter tastes are generally aversive in nature. However, there's a classic saying in toxicology, which is that the dose makes the poison. And so the same compound that, if taken in large amounts, can have toxic effects, sometimes in much, much smaller amounts, can have beneficial health effects. And I don't think we have to look any further, for instance, than many conventional pharmaceutical agents to prove this point as reflected by their taste profile. If you've ever had to crush and chew most prescription medications, they are profoundly bitter. And I don't think that's an accident in terms of what it's telling our body about the potency of these agents. When you look at the activation of the bitter taste receptor, and I have to say a lot of this work has been done in animals or in human cells that have been taken outside of the body. Studies that have been done in human beings looking at activation of bitter taste receptors have led to more discordant results. But there does seem to be some directionality in the scientific literature that the effect of activation of these receptors can do positive things to our digestion, including increasing a sense of pleasant fullness after meals. Now, interestingly, they don't really seem to affect stomach emptying time when this has been studied in human volunteers consuming bitter beverages or bitter foods. Bitter taste receptors in the GI tract also seem to be potent stimulators of the release of certain GI gut hormones that are called the incretins. And these hormones are released by the GI tract. And among their many functions is that they augment the release of insulin from the pancreas, sort of prepare the body for the metabolic load that's going to come once the ingested food is digested and absorbed. One of these incretins is kind of having a moment right now. Many of you listening are probably familiar with the use of synthetic GLP-1 agents to assist in, among other things, diabetes control and weight management. And it turns out that activation of the bitter taste receptors in the GI tract also intrinsically stimulates, among other things, GLP-1 release. Much like with the sweet taste receptors, individual tolerance and sensitivity to bitter taste is in some part genetically determined. Some of us might recall from our high school biology days a classic experiment that can illustrate Mendelian genetics, where some individuals lack the ability to taste a certain chemical compound. The abbreviation is PTC. So in the high school experiment, a bunch of us, when you all put the little strip of paper in our mouth, about 3/4 of the class is going to spit it out really quickly because it's intensely bitter. And then the other 25% are going to be like, what's going on with all the rest of you? I don't taste anything. Digestive bitters, and we'll end on a brief note about that, are concoctions that can be used before meals to help assist and aid in digestion for people who benefit from the addition of more of a bitter flavor profile to what they're about to eat. I want to say a brief word, and I think this, again, hopefully dovetails really nicely with Iman's excellent talk around the traditional Chinese medicine perspective of the fundamental characteristics of food. So I'm going to do a brief sojourn into another system of medicine, in this case, Ayurveda, which is the traditional medical system practiced in the Indian subcontinent, which has a fair amount to say about the bitter taste as a fundamental component of a food. So, and this is an oversimplification, but in Ayurvedic medicine, they talk about 6 fundamental properties of foods, the rasa, and rasa in Sanskrit, roughly translated, can be interpreted as taste, but really can also be interpreted as the fundamental nature of something. So you can use this word to describe, for instance, art as its fundamental essence. The 6 fundamental tastes in Ayurvedic medicine are sweet, sour, salty, bitter. So far, so good. And then they identify an astringent taste and a pungent taste. And again, there's a lot of overlap between this and other traditional systems of medicine, including TCM, which we just heard about. Also, getting back to this idea of individual constitutions, Ayurvedic medicine talks about what are called the doshas, which is another way of talking about individual characteristics, some of which are intrinsic to the person and some of which are affected by external circumstances. The three primary doshas that are discussed in Ayurvedic medicine are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And the bitter taste in Ayurvedic medicine is felt to balance excesses of Pitta and Kapha. Pitta is defined by the elemental characteristics of fire and water. So think inflammation, redness, heat, fiery personalities. Kapha is earth and water. So think of mud, think of slower, more languid, prone to fluid retention, prone to constipation. And bitter flavor profiles are felt to bring those into balance. Whereas conversely, individuals who either constitutionally or because of their circumstances have an excess of vata. Vata is the energy of air and goes by various monikers, void, ether, space. Think of cold, reedy, dry, a little bit flighty. Bitter tastes can exacerbate excess vata. The bitter taste is felt to be a predominantly cooling and drying taste in Ayurvedic medicine, and some of the properties of foods with bitter taste are felt to include antimicrobial properties, choleretic, meaning stimulatory of bile and digestive enzyme production, and that the bitter taste tends to stimulate appetite for other tastes. And many of these observations are borne out in some of the more recent scientific literature we have subsequent to the identification of the bitter taste receptor. Arguably, the most common bitter food that we consume in the United States is coffee. And certainly black coffee fits the bill. Now, again, because of individual tolerance to bitter tastes, a lot of us often have to disguise the bitterness of black coffee by leaning on some of the other primary tastes, aka sweet, and also some of the unguent, oily properties of adding in things like dairy products to make coffee more palatable for the individual. There's a number of foods that we can incorporate in our diet to diversify the taste profile and that are going to be enriched in this bitter taste profile. And it just so happens that if you look at just even a few examples here, you start to check the boxes for a lot of foods that one might even consider so-called superfoods by virtue of their nutritional and potential medicinal qualities. So some examples of foods that are enriched in the bitter flavor profile: leafy green vegetables, of course. Think of Swiss chard, think of collards. I included radicchio on here. Please don't at me about this. I know that it's red, it's not green, but again, intensely bitter. Belgian endive. Dandelion greens are a blockbuster food to incorporate in our diet. And again, they have a rather bitter taste. Cruciferous vegetables, same there. I mentioned coffee. Chocolate, of course, in its unadulterated form is very bitter. I would also point out that in indigenous cultures where chocolate was originally part of the food culture, it was not intended to be a sweet product. It was really much more of a savory, pungent product. And it's just with the addition of all the sugar and milk fat that we put into it to, disguise the bitter undertones, and we also lose some of its medicinal value. I want to give a special highlight, if we're talking about food as medicine, to a potentially medicinal food some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not be. It's a real blockbuster when it comes to its bitter flavor profile, and that is, of course, bitter melon or bitter gourd. This is a member of the cucumber family. And for those of you who've seen this, they basically look like cucumbers, but with all these little tumor-like lumpy bumpies all over the plant. It's a traditional component of many food cultures around the globe, in particular throughout Asia, Southeast, East, and South Asia. Lest I sound like a hypocrite, I'm going to freely confess I am not a personal fan of bitter melon. Its name does not lie. There's no false advertising here. Intensely bitter flavor. It contains a number of different plant alkaloids that give it this bitter flavor profile. But there's also a substantial body of literature. There's been well over 1,000 studies published now looking at bitter melon, either the whole plant or some of its extractives, and its potential medicinal properties. In particular, a lot of attention devoted to bitter melon as something that may have some mild anti-glycemic properties to help attenuate post-meal blood sugar rises or help people with impaired fasting glucose. Two of the dishes that I highlight down at the bottom, to give an example of how bitter melon can be used culinarily, the one on the bottom left is a dish called champuru, a Goya champuru. This is a traditional Okinawan dish, which is a stir fry of bitter melon along with eggs, tofu, typically pork belly, and then flavored with a soy sauce dashi base. And it's a traditional component of the diet in the Ryukyuan islands of Japan, such as Okinawa. And the dish on the left, bitter melon in Hindi, is Kerala. And so this is a curry that's made with bitter melon, just to highlight some of the ubiquity of use of this. If you're looking to incorporate bitter melon in your diet, the peak growing season for this vegetable, at least in northern hemisphere climates, is summertime. And you're looking for plants that have a lot of these little bumps and have some good firmness in the plant. You don't want it to be overly soft. And also to make it more palatable, again, your mileage may vary, but pre-soaking it in lightly salted water can extract some of those bitter flavors if it's too strong for you. And the final thing I want to end with is a little bit of a DIY. I mentioned digestive bitters earlier, and there is an extensive use of various digestive bitter agents in multiple different traditional medical models, including traditional European folk medicine. Many of these agents are commonly consumed in small amounts as digestives, as aperitifs before meals. So as an example, one need only think of the rich number of very herbal liqueurs across Europe that would fit this bill. Think of things like Aperol, think of things like Amaro. And these are flavored with some of the herbals that I'm going to mention in a little bit of a DIY recipe. I hesitated to include this, but I thought I'd go ahead and do so anyways. Along the lines of DIY herbal medicine, and I would emphasize, I can't emphasize enough something Iman had said. If you are sourcing your own herbal products because you're going to make a tincture and extraction with them, it's really important that the sourcing of the herb is very high quality. Anytime you're making an extraction, a tincture of an herbal agent, you're going to extract everything that's in there. And that can include pesticides and heavy metals if you're not careful where you're getting it from. But all the ingredients that I listed here in this potential recipe, if you want to explore making your own digestive bitters at home, these are very common culinary ingredients, at least the plants themselves are. So angelica root, for instance, is already a flavoring that's used in some of these European cordials that I just mentioned, including gin. Angelica root is often one of the herbs that's included in the making of gin, along with more commonly recognized ones like juniper berry. Gentian, same thing, very bitter herbal that's used to flavor a lot of classic liqueurs like Chambord. Dried dandelion root, dandelions, both the greens and the root, have a number of these bitter flavors, as well as some of these health promoting properties. And you can tinker with this kind of a recipe. The idea is you find some of these bitter herbs and you soak them in a neutral alcohol. Typically, alcohol is what's used for most digestive bitters, for most tinctures in general. These are not very water soluble, so doing a water-based concoction, it's going to be a lot milder than what you'd be able to do with an alcohol-based extraction, and it's not going to last very long. For folks that, for various reasons, either for health reasons or personal reasons, strictly exclude any alcohol intake from their diet, you can do herbal tincture extractions with, among other things, glycerin. It's not going to be a shelf stable. It's not going to last as long, and it needs to be refrigerated if you're doing something like that. But the idea is you basically mix some compounds, and I listed some optional add-ins that you can put in as well for up to 2 weeks. And then the dose is typically 1 dropper full or a quarter of a teaspoon. So we're talking very little actual alcohol content, 15 to 30 minutes before a meal. There are some individuals in whom I would be careful about doing this. Certainly, like I said, anybody who for medical or personal reasons shouldn't be consuming alcohol, there are non-alcohol derived digestive bitters that are an alternative. I would not recommend digestive bitters for anybody who's pregnant or breastfeeding. There's very little safety data. And moreover, during breastfeeding, some of these compounds, if they make their way into breast milk, might decrease the palatability of the breast milk for the breastfeeding infant. Dandelion in general is a member of the ragweed family, so anybody with a significant ragweed allergy should also probably avoid these. And that's what I have. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harper. So we're running a little over. We have opened up the chat. So far, there's just, I answered one through the chat, and there's only one other question. So what I think I'll do is I'll keep my eye on the chat. I have a very, very brief presentation that I'll start. And once I start it, hopefully it will be available online, and we will then pause and answer any questions that come in. And in the meantime, maybe Dr. Maj and Dr. Harper, while I am looking, there was a question from Helena about website recommendations around spices. I don't have any specific around spices. All of the recommendations the websites are really about the things that Dr. Maj was talking about herbal extracts, but and things that are encapsulated. But if either of you have an answer while I am getting ready to share my screen, you can go ahead and do that.
Sure, I'll just dump some of the websites that are more European into the chat there.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe while you're loading, there was a question about ways that we can help our patients accommodate to a low salt diet. And it's a good question. In terms of the actual time it takes for people to accommodate to a low salt diet, I don't know the answer to that. I can imagine it probably is individual mileage may vary. But certainly from a culinary standpoint, things you lean on are, again, you go back to this idea of when you're making a meal, you want to be balancing flavors and tastes. That's what it's all about. And so if you are having to remove a positive taste stimulus, you need to add something in that's going to take the place of it. And this is where leaning on culinary herbs and spices that have unique flavor profiles can be helpful. It's where adding some interesting textural components to the food, some interesting, maybe some spicy notes, for instance. I think you just have to encourage people to get more creative because we are so used to leaning on adequately salting food to provide that pleasurable background. Do you guys have any thoughts around that? How you help folks on a low salt diet adapt to their sodium restrictions?
I would mostly just say that it is learning about other flavors and spices is really the way to go. Yeah. That you can use a much less salt when you have lots of other flavors. Basically, there are an awful lot of different cultural things that involve culinary herbs. And the one thing I would add about buying spices is that you can buy them in bulk and it's much less expensive. And then also, from a medicinal perspective, probably just having your spices for a few months, keeping them in a tight closed jar or even in the freezer is going to give them a little bit more medicinal properties. And the ones that are already in the jars, we don't know how old they are, and they're also a lot more expensive. So I just wanted to give a recipe for turmeric paste here. Turmeric is, as Dr. Maj said, is going to be much more bioavailable if it's heated with a little bit of oil and black pepper. So you can make a paste and then add that to your foods. And you also can make a golden milk out of turmeric paste using a little non-dairy milk and maple syrup. And any of these ones, you can add a little ginger or cinnamon, again, if your constitution is that it's not going to make you too hot. There's a resource here, and again, this will all be on our website from the presentation of some different recipes and some YouTube things. Adding turmeric either as a turmeric paste or as a spice to rice, to a porridge with lentils, or fermenting it. Ways to add ginger in, ginger tea, make your own ginger ale, pickle your ginger, adding it to soups and stir fries. And again, this is great for nausea and for other components of digestion. And then we already talked about using Ceylon cinnamon, including it into, breakfast foods, pancake recipes, putting it on instead of a sweetener on fruits when you're baking. And those were my things, just to add in. And so I'm saying all of that very briefly, just so that we can have time to answer. Can we show or have a list of how to make turmeric paste? Do you want me to pull that up again? Let's see, what else did people say? Any other questions before we close? We have a couple of other minutes. While we're waiting to see if any more questions come in, I want to let you know that some of you might have gotten the email that we're also starting in 2025 an integrative women's health series, and the first one will be on May 9th around perimenopause and menopause. And if you go to our website under the Cha Chi Ming component, there's a list of the series that we're going to have online for that.
And Deborah, also, there's another session of this series of the
Oh, that's
digestive.
right. And then on April 4th, we have another session where we'll be talking about the low FODMAPs diet, as well as an integrative approach to irritable bowel syndrome. And we would love to have you join us live, or again, recordings will be on our website afterwards.
Wonderful. And Carolyn just put the link in the Cha Chi Ming link into the chat box. So if you click on it, you can register, and it's going to take you to the whole series. The ones have been already recorded, you can watch them for free, and the future ones you can register and you can join us for free.
Yeah, and that's the being free is the support of the Cha Chi Ming Endowment for Education, which we are greatly appreciative. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Harper and Dr. Maj, and looking forward to seeing you all in a few weeks for our next presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.